Following a series of high-profile crimes committed by offenders on parole, a national summit has been convened to address systemic shortcomings in the parole system. The high-level gathering, bringing together members of the judiciary, correctional services officials, victim advocacy groups and law enforcement, aims to examine the policies and practices that have eroded public confidence. The summit was prompted by growing public and political outrage over incidents that revealed apparent gaps in risk assessment, offender monitoring, and interagency communication. Now, to talk more about this, I'm joined by Dr. Wim Roestenburg from the Northwest University. A very good afternoon to you, Prof. Thanks very much for your time. The real surprise here, because the problems of our parole system, I think, are well documented. The real surprise is that we are only beginning to talk about this in a very deliberate and systemic way now.
Yes, thank you very much, Vuyo, for this opportunity. I can say that the problems that have been highlighted through this summit are complex. There are multiple issues that were laid on the table. So I can give you a very short overview of what most of those issues were, and then what were the proposed solutions also to some of the issues. So in the first place, the problem with the Correctional Services Department itself internally is an area of major concern. And this concerns issues such as the culture of entitlement that exists in the correctional facilities, with offenders they expect to be released, and that imprisonment, institutionalization is just a brief period, and they must just hang in there until they can be released. And this is in contradiction to what it is supposed to be, namely that it is not a given that a person should be placed on parole. So this is an internal culture of expectation that is being created probably through the operational issues that the organization faces. So other issues on the internal side concern management issues, corruption, where there is tampering with cases. There's uncertainty about the programs and exactly what programs must be completed. There is uncertainty about how should an offender be placed in a program, the choices of programs. So, and coupled to that is the whole idea, is the whole situation of a lack of a proper IT system that can guide the operations and can ensure that the tracking of the offender occurs throughout his journey in this context. Then, as far as the second part of the whole offender journey is concerned, namely parole and parole applications, several very important and critical problems were mentioned and came to the fore. I think, in my view, one of the most prominent issues mentioned was the fact that victims should be included in the parole consideration process. And this does not happen consistently. The procedures are there, but it is just not being done. And this is often a cause for huge concern, because then society is not directly involved in releasing this person, and the victim should be actively involved in doing that, in deciding about parole. So that is an area of major concern as far as I'm concerned. The parole application process, the investigations that go into this whole assessment of parole eligibility is inconsistently applied throughout the organization. So in some instances it's very thoroughly done, in other instances it is not thoroughly done. So that creates errors in the whole process. And one of my own recommendations was to utilize a scale for the quantitative assessment of parolees in order to ensure a more accurate and systematic method for determining the risk. The risk will always be there.
Unpack that for us, Dr. Roestenburg. What do you mean by utilizing scale?
Yeah, so a major part of parole consideration is the assessment of the offender's eligibility and readiness to be released to society. So this process is often conducted by social workers and psychologists and criminologists. So there is obviously a shortage of these people within correctional services due to budgetary constraints. But besides that, the kind of assessment reports that are produced by social workers can be a source of error because every social worker does it in his or her own best ability, and they are very good as professionals. But what we want a numerical system, a metric that can be used with greater accuracy to determine the level of risk. These are called quantitative measures, and those measures do not exist within the correctional context. Some psychologists use, for example, tests in order to make recommendations based on the results of those tests, but the social workers do not have any of those instruments. So one of the solutions is to immediately adopt an instrument, and I happen to have such an instrument developed over the past 10 years already, and we've tested it recently in the correctional context, and we have found that it greatly improves the accuracy and precision with which social workers can conduct their assessments. So that is what has been recommended and adopted as a solution to ensure better quality assessments. Another issue is that parolees or people who qualify for parole, they must go through these programs, but the programs are inconsistent in themselves. So there's a whole quality assurance and quality improvement process that must occur within the correctional facilities in order to improve that situation. Yes?
Did the summit give you hope that there's going to be movement? In other words, the stakeholders who were there were all aligned and recognized the urgency of dealing with this problem?
Definitely. I was very, very excited at this conference because I think there is hope. There is a seriousness about looking actively at these problems. And I think that the whole atmosphere and the mood within the correctional services environment is busy changing. And that is the first step, in my view, to bring an improvement. Another aspect that I found very, very critical was that all the speakers' comments and concerns that were raised and solutions that were proposed kind of converged into the same issues. And for me, that brings hope. So we are all speaking from the same point of origin. We are all looking at the same kinds of solutions. So I'm very hopeful. And if I look at the profile of all the speakers and the delegates that were at the conference, I'm certainly hopeful that we will be able, we as society will be able to assist the Correctional Services Department in making a turnaround for the better. And this will be in the best interests of the victims, it will be in the best interest of society, and it will contribute to prevent recidivism or the tendency of people to return to crime, as has been evidenced by these cases mentioned.
Dr. Roestenburg, let me thank you very much for your time. He's from the Northwest University and was one of the participants at that summit that is looking at addressing the shortcomings of the country's parole system. We've seen recently many people who are on parole actually recommitting offenses that they would have been held or been in prison for, and a number of them quite dangerous criminals indeed. People who are ordering the deaths of people, the massacre in Lusikisiki being one of those.